But
No, see that white one? See that white thing?
yeah,
That wasn't plugged into the back.
this wasn't?
No.
Oh, the black. Oh, I see.
Yeah.
All right. Wherever you go, there you are. All right. So what are we doing first? History or ethics?
History.
History. That's what I thought. All right. So I believe we left off on the ecumenical councils of the early church. We're going to try to blow up to about 600 A.D. As you can tell, there's so much to cover in early church history, right? So here's where we're at right now. Today, I actually uploaded, I think, 3 lectures under philosophy. Anybody here taking philosophy? Yeah? Corey, are you in the philosophy class?
No.
No? I'm talking unpopularly. Okay, you guys are robbing yourself blind.
Some of those links don't go, they go when they say video not available though.
That's odd. That's very weird. So I'm dropping it into the dashboard, just like Facebook, and it doesn't work there either? Well, it should be. Not only that, look, in philosophy, you actually have double lectures, not actually 3 times the lectures. You have me lecturing in here or doing the YouTube thing as backup. Then I've uploaded at least 4 or 5 lectures, MP3s by Geisler, Aristotle, Plato. So I have to cover those guys. You have Logic by Geisler. You have Aquinas, Augustine by Geisler. And then there are actually other lectures from the other philosophy professor that taught the class last time. So, I mean, there's just a ton of info, but I think there's just 4 people in that class. Of course, philosophy, who wants that, No pun intended.
It's not really Christian.
I know, right? Vain philosophy. Who's taking world religions? Anybody in here? 2? All right, that's it? Oh, we're shutting down school. Just joking.
I'll take it twice.
Okay, good. Back to back. World religion is going to be interesting. Let me ask.
That's semester, right?
Starting on the 27th.
Oh, you're talking about next semester?
The fall module 2.
Oh.
That's starting next week on the 27th.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen unpopularly for the viewer here, church history, philosophy, and ethics, is there's going to be multiple YouTube lectures uploaded from my home office in conjunction with this. So next week, I just want to end here on Protestant Reformation and keying in on certain key figures within Protestant circles. And for me, early church history is way more interesting. And really, this should be an early church history. Then you should have medieval times and then do a course on Protestantism. But that's hard. Normally, you could teach this in 4 months. To do it in short modules like this is close to impossible. But that's why there's all these other papers uploaded, right, that I took from William Nix. There's a ton of it. And if you want that entire file, you have to email me. This would be for church history. I sent you the whole file because you were asking for it, and that went through fine, right?
Yeah.
In fact, here's what we're going to do because I'm too busy. Ask Corey to forward it to you. Then you'll probably have it by midnight.
Give me your email.
Give Corey your email. And for the popular viewer, email Corey. And he'll forward you my historical theologian professor, William Nix, who is just dynamite. Walking telephone booth of information. Just crazy. Crazy good. So, in any event, you should stay on top of Populi before Sunday. At least download the lectures, whatever is uploadable, so you have them. If you don't do that on Christian ethics, and you don't do it on philosophy, and don't do it on history, you'll be lost next week. It's just going to be a huge time gap. Okay?
What's the deal with the final? Can you explain that?
Um,
I've never taken a final online like that. I don't understand.
It's open book.
Is that?
well,
Is it? Oh, you just.
yeah.
Is it multiple choice? That's all.
We'll adjust that
Okay.
at the end of the class, because we're losing too much time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I really don't know. How's that?
Yeah. Okay.
I didn't create the final.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Okay.
And I wouldn't create a final to have it in the classroom, because that would just take away even more time from the lectures. You see what I'm saying? Let's do that on the last week, Hi, Kayla. Good to see you. Okay, so stay on top of the lectures. We're going to go fast, and we'll probably go somewhat late today unless I lose my voice. I've been talking for 4 hours today, in addition to normal stuff. So I think we finished on this slide last week. Yes? No? Looks familiar? And then I mentioned here in the year 500, right, the first plans for the Vatican Palace was laid. We mentioned that. Eastern and Western churches reconciled somewhat in 519. 520, Irish monasteries as centers of learning, spiritual life, and training missionaries are put in place. 525, Christianity spreads again like wildfire throughout the Middle East, including the Arabian Peninsula. And then 529, Monk Benedict begins his monastery and writes the Rule, a guide for the monastic life, being a monk, living in a monastery. Which I think today is quite refreshing, given just the era of materialism, Capitalism, materialism, communism, you name it. How about just, hide yourself in a monastery and read the great works and sort of just enjoying the Lord. But then along with that, it's not good for man to dwell alone, the scriptures say. Supposed to get married and do the right thing and so forth. All right, now, 553, St. Sophia Basilica in Constantinople is consecrated. In 587, the Visigoths, you have the Goths, then you have the Visigoths in the west, and the Orthogoths in the east. West Visigoths, east Orthogoths. Not Orthodox, Orthogoth. Who are they, Corey? Who are the Goths? Where were they from? Do we know?
The Nordic church.
Not were they, not a question on a question. You guys have read the book.
Come on.
Come on.
Is that Eastern Germany?
Have you guys read the book?
Scandinavia?
No, it's sort of part of it.
Eastern Germany.
You can think of like it wouldn't entail all of Germanica. Like when you look at ancient maps, you see Germanica, right? Germanica, which are all the tribes within the Germanic era before Germany. So there you have offshoots, right? You have Germanica. Then you can see just how some people there went Scandinavian. That would be the Norsemen, right? The North, the Vikings, Norwegians, and you have the Danes. You have Sweden, and so on. And even there, we didn't get along. My father was Norwegian. My grandpa was German, and my mom Swedish and German. So it's interesting how it works over there. But still, I mean, Denmark is supposedly one of the safest places to live in the world today. Believe it or not. Even though it has some really, really weird sexual laws. Go figure. But just they're more concerned about economy than they are about fighting and having arms and everything else. And it's just an island, Denmark is. We used to go back and forth on the equivalent of Catalina Flyer, you know what I mean? And just tear up Denmark and go back to Sweden. And Sweden is clean. So we were like not looked upon so highly. What's interesting is if you live in southern Sweden, like where I was from, it's a rougher dialect in Swedish. Like, hur är läget och sånt? Det är bra själv. Up north, hur är läget och sånt? Bra själv. So that is more like, so when you meet a Swede, and like, I'm from Sweden, I've been there for 30 years, well, when are you going to lose your accent? They're from the north, which is closer to, say, Norwegian, right? The Norwegian way of talking. They would say the same thing. 30, right? 30, we would say 30, we would say 30. Denmark would be like 30. So you go from rr in the north to really in Denmark. And then, of course, you get to Germany, Deutsche Demokratrepublik, it's hardcore. So that's where you get those R's from. And I think the southern Swedes can pick up English and Spanish better than the northern Swedes. Because they would speak English like this, sort of, porque de tal manera amo Dios al mundo. You know what I mean? Just have that danciness to it. All right, having said that, the Visigoths, west, Black Sea, invasion, etc. Lots of stuff that you have to read in your book. Go back and read the Visigoths, what they did. I'm just going to name a few players here and there. Of course, by the time they got converted to Christianity, they were Arians. They were Arian Christians. And remember, that was just thrown out at the Council of Nicaea, which was in what year?
325.
325, correct. All right, so in 589, the Visigoths renounced Arianism and accepts the teachings of the church. Ooh, there we go. They finally accepted the teachings of the church in 589. In 590, Gregory I is elected the first pope in the strand of what we call medieval popes, starting at this era. Then in 597, Augustine of Canterbury brings Christianity to Britain. But if you remember, when Jesus had his 12 disciples, right, he also called the 70. And one of those fellas made their way to Britain before this time. Obviously, it would be in the 1st century. And I forgot which of the 70 that was. It should be at the very end of the 70 in the book of Luke, at the very bottom, in the Orthodox Study Bible. Okay, let's see. By the year 600, the barbarian invasion comes to somewhat of a halt in Western Europe. Who are the barbarians? The Goths, right? Can you name another set or group of barbarians?
Muslims.
Well, they're still barbarians, aren't they? Right? You know, that website, Jew News, you know, they say it ain't news if it ain't Jews, something like that. They're posting some crazy, crazy videos right now, what ISIS is doing, that I think YouTube's going to pull. You know, it's just, you know, beheadings, shooting kids. I watched one today, and it was so upsetting. You know, you can't blame what the modern barbarians are doing. The motorcycle gangs in Austria and Germany, no surrender, headed over there to fight against these clowns. I wonder, where's Hell's Angels? Where's the Mongols? Where are the Vagos? Why don't you guys go before they come here? It would be interesting to see all these rival motorcycle gangs team up and just go over there and handle it. Because a lot of them are fearless. A lot of them are fearless. In any event, so we got Gregory I elected the first pope of the medieval popes, and then 597, Augustine again brings Christianity to Britain. By the year 600, barbarian invasion comes to somewhat of a halt in Western Europe, somewhat of a halt, because it still sort of continued, right? Europe is widespread. You have the Roman Empire, you know, it's collapsing. You have the new Roman Empire, and there's problems now with the Latin language. We don't want Latin. We want to roll with the Greek tongue, you know, versus the Latin. That's where the East and the West comes in. East would focus on Greek, right? The Greek. Hence, you got the Greek Orthodox Church and so forth. In the same year, Pope Gregory introduces the Bible in a picture book for the illiterate, right? So there we go. At least they have something to read. Now, at this point, I would stop and think, wow, so people got saved by just reading a picture book. You know, the gospel is very, very simple. Very, very simple. But it's also very, very complex. Once you start thinking about it, right? And once you start thinking about it, without understanding church history somewhat, and historical theology, and systematic theology, which is just enterprises on their own, it's easy to come up with cultic ideologies. You know, for God so loved the world that he gave his son. Well, who's his son? How did that happen? What does that mean? Okay, he gave just a son? No, it's a divine son. No, it's a human son. Well, what kind of son? If he was both, he'd have two minds. All this stuff comes into play. So, when he introduced here, Pope Gregory, the Bible as a picture book, and you have, you know, here's John 3:16, here you got the baptism, the Holy Spirit descending, Father speaking. Okay, that's Trinity. Okay, I don't know what Trinity means, but that's all good. I accept it. I know I'm broken. Here we go. You know? You don't have to be a theologian to be saved. In the same year, or I should say, just about 10 years later, we got our friend Muhammad. I'm being sarcastic. He declares himself a prophet, and Islam is, of course, founded and on the rise, and they have not stopped since then. If we could just learn from Charles the Great of the Franks, he stopped them for 100 years. We could just learn what he did. Not that he did everything ethically, but, you know, it's like we've been doing Christian ethics. We've been talking about civil disobedience, right, the Christian position. We've been talking about pacifism, turning the other cheek all the time. I've been mentioning that Christ says, you know, those who live by the sword die by the sword, Peter. But in the book of Revelation, he comes back true just as he's ticked off with a sword out of his mouth. Are you going to be the one saying, you just says those who live by the sword die by the sword? Who are you to come here and judge with a sword? It's justice. So should we stand at the borders of Iraq and just go, Jesus loves me, this I know, peacefully? They cut our heads off. What do? You send in an army. Then you get the radicals saying, no, bomb the place, but you're going to have too many casualties. Will you? Will you? If you stop them, only the Lord knows how many more they will kill in the name of Allah. there was an interesting interview on Fox about Islam. The guy doesn't look like a scholar. He's just a blogger, kind of semi-long hair, and he wrote this blog, and it wasn't Megyn Kelly who was interviewing him or any of the others, a lady that I'm not used to watch so much. But he was saying, look, she was saying to him, what is this deal about? And this is a liberal saying, you know, we shouldn't hate Muslims, but he hates Islam. And I'm right there too. Islam, the Quranic writings, the Quran. If you read it, when we take world religions, just read it. Read the whole thing. Read the Quran. And have a highlighter and highlight all the verses as a smite the infidel at the necks. That's why they're cutting people's heads off. You know? When you see, you know, little Muslim, little kids that are 9 years old quoting the surahs on Al Jazeera, on that station, and they're going, you know, Allah, Allah, I am your servant. If there's a Jew hiding behind the rock, like really some pathos, the rocks will cry out, there's a Jew behind me, come kill him. Even the rocks, inanimate objects, will cry out, there's a Jew or a Christian behind here, you know. So if you act on those verses, yeah, you get radical Islam. And guess what? The majority of Muslims are not. But I'm worried about the minority of Muslims in the world, because the minority throughout the world is the size of the United States. That's a big minority. If that's 4% of billions. And most Muslims, you know, they're brought up, yeah, I'm not touching religious pluralism today, but in most Muslim nations, they're illiterate, they don't read, they can't even read the Quran. Or the Quran. You say the Quran to a Muslim, he's just going to laugh at you. You can't even pronounce my book. So say the Quran. Q-U-R'-A-N, not K-O-R-A-N. We can do that in here. Just if you want to have respect with them. But very alarming stuff. Very alarming stuff. So Muhammad is on the rise, and if you notice here, it says on this bullet, Mecca to Medina and return to Mecca. What happened there? If you get to debate an Islamic or Muslim apologist, you know, some of them are very, very, very slippery. What I would do if I were you, I would just type in one of my former mentors, William Lane Craig versus Muslims, and you're going to see some really great debates. You know, who really is Jesus? Who is God? And so forth. William Lane Craig versus Muslims. Just go on YouTube, type in debates, and you'll see all sorts of other stuff. And you see particularly one Muslim apologist. He'll just go, no, you guys are lying. It's like, no, we're not. Here's my document. No, you guys are lying. It's like, no, here's the document. No, you guys are lying. Okay, whatever. In the World Religions class, if you remind me, somebody that's taking the class, I'll make some copies of various sections from the Hadith. Hadith, H-A-D-D-I-T-H, which is a secondary Islamic document that they both go back and forth on. But in any event, in Mecca, that is, you know, you got Muhammad, you know, little caravan, 20-year-old guy, you know, in his early 20s, very charismatic, you know, rolling around with his wife Khadija, who's 47, and she's, of course, wealthy, and he's having dreams in his bed. Visions and dreams. Now remember, he doesn't have the New Testament. And what does it say in the New Testament? Test the spirits. Hold fast to that which is good. Well, he couldn't test anything. The Torah or the Tanakh, the Old Testament wasn't translated into Arabic, nor was the New Testament translated into Arabic, even in the 6th century. So I had heard of monotheism. He had heard of Jesus. Because when in Medina, there were Jews and Christians living peacefully. In Mecca, Mecca was largely polytheistic, believing in many gods and so forth. And I'm on a little tangent, but I got to drop it in case I don't see you again in world religion, so you have a little bit of background on this. So he starts having visions, and so he walks in to his wife Khadija, and he says, look, I don't know if I'm being visited by God, listen to this, or by the jinns. Who are the jinns? They're sort of like the equivalent of demons within Christian theology. J-I-N-N, you know, sort of floating between heaven and hell, right? And I forgot what movie we talked about that last week. I still can't think of the movie where the jinns appear in the Arabian desert and they just look crazy. Eyes on fire, they're super tall, riding around, and they're sort of like the warriors. That would be the Hollywood depiction of the jinns, or the Jeeths. Yeah, listen, don't listen to that stuff. We have not found the Nephilim, trust me. That is nonsense. But he walks into Khadijah and says, look, I'm being visited by such and such, and I don't know if it's angelic, demonic, or of God. My first thing would be, wow, God cannot make himself clear. If that's God, you can't make yourself clear? You're gonna really approach Muhammad like that? And then she's confused, Khadijah, so she goes to one of her relatives and says, hey, I don't know what's going on with my husband. He's a prophet. Listen to him. Tell him to listen to the messenger. And I think of, we went to Nazareth, right? Church of Annunciation, where we have Mary's cave, where Gabriel showed up to Mary. And of course, she flipped out, like, what the world? Because you haven't seen an angel, right? Of course you would be fearful. Same thing with Joseph. What's the first thing? Don't be fearful. I'm sent by God. Angelos in Greek means messenger, has a message. Well, demons too come with messages. That's why, and they can come as angels of light. But this particular demon that was visiting Muhammad, I think it was Moroni, the same one that showed up to Joseph Smith in New York. Similar message. I might be wrong. But when Muhammad refused to write down the Quran or the Quranic verses, the sporadic sayings that he had received, that later on was collected into the Quran. He was even being choked in his bed. Write these things down. Very violent. Either he made it up or it happened. Now, you have Old Testament Judaism, right, up to the time of Christ. Then we have now 2,000 years of church history. Let's just go with all the way from Genesis 1 all the way up to Malachi, right? Let us go from there to the 6th century. That's a lot of history, right? Just 600 years of church history. Listen, Muhammad, they're all corrupt. The Jews are corrupt. The Christians are corrupt. Which means what in light of church history? The gates of hell did prevail against the church, if Muhammad is correct. God could not hold on to his own book. And moreover, when they say, because they allude to the Old Testament, and they allude to the New Testament, certain quotations, and gets half of things wrong because they're paraphrases that he had heard of. One thing that was good about it was monotheism was introduced to Mecca. Because polytheism is obviously out to lunch. That would be false. But it's a monotheistic demonology. Really, that's what I believe it is. And all the prophets in the Old Testament were Jewish. Not one of them were Palestinian, because there wasn't no Palestine. None of them were Arabic. Why waste your time, Yahweh, with all these Jews, a Jewish Messiah, just for 600 years after the ascension of Christ, at the advent or birth of Islam? You're going to set this record straight. And now there's anti-Semitism and killing Jews and Christians all over the place. It doesn't have the ring of truth. That's Islam in 5 minutes. So, he is not well received in Mecca. He gets his first handful of followers, which are whom? Like me starting a cult and you guys coming with me. Open cavalry in Hollywood. Right? Right next to the whiskey. All we're going to do is recruit the poor and the homeless and the former strippers who came from Tennessee that can't make it as an actress. We pull them in and we'll fleece the flock. Feed on the weak. It's exactly what the cults do. Scientology in particular. Now they're going to come after me, right? So this lecture is for sure going to be locked. A lot of it on YouTube if you have access for 2 weeks. But anyway, saying that, his family, uncle, grandpa, whatever, followed him. And he left Mecca because he wasn't popular. They were polytheistic. Like, get out of here, dude. You're not a prophet. He comes to Medina. Peaceful Jews, Christians getting along, right? And that's when he starts kicking it with them, hey, what's going on? Yeah, I'm a monotheist too. And then just some time later he says, listen, I'm a prophet of God. Jews are like, no, you're not. We're waiting for the Messiah. And Christians are like, the Messiah came. We don't have to worry about anything. until two witnesses, revelation, etc., Christ comes back. So you're not a prophet. The canon of Scripture, canon means rule, canonization of the Scriptures, Old and New Testaments, already done. We believe this for thousands of years. So you're not a prophet. That's when you notice in the Quran that the Meccan surahs, surah means like chapter or heading, surah 1, surah 2, surah 3, surah 4 in the Quran, the Meccan surahs are a little more friendly than the surahs in Medina. They started getting more violent and violent and violent. Now, you could say it's more demonic in Medina because this demon named Allah is really on a roll, or it's man-made completely, or it's a combination of the two. But it can't be sent by God, not when you have a conflicting message. So in Medina, he's literally taken the sword of Allah on steroids, right? He gains a following there, not by love, by fear. Then he goes back to Mecca and slaughters the city. And many Muslims have done exactly the same, even to this day, unfortunately. So, now, let's move on. 614, the Persians take Damascus and Jerusalem. Taken over, they remove Christian crosses as erected by Helena, who was whom? Constantine's mother. Which is why we have the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem, or Bethlehem, with your little chet. Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And of course, she built the Garden Tomb, right? No, she didn't. Yes, no. No.
Doing Garden Tomb as well. What?
Way before. Way before, yeah. All right, so, timeline continued. 632, the Muslims have swept throughout the Middle East, and of course, they can call it now Palestine, and conquered Jerusalem. By 640, Islam has largely wiped out Christianity in Egypt, North Africa, which combined about 1 million believers. Just wiped them out. By the year 900, very few Christians remained in that region whatsoever, and they're doing it again. You know, Iraq has a lot of Christian history. So, you know, it's some of the oldest that just continued up till the modern day. They're just killing them, burning up churches, and it's almost to the point you're going, God, why? All these tombs, all these churches, our history is just lit ablaze. And what does our president say? It's going to take a long time to figure out how to beat them. I don't know what he puts in his pipe, but it's not good to smoke what he's smoking. Like Norman Geisler would say, put that in your pipe and smoke it. Yes, your author that you're reading, he said that. So I got that from him, so don't think I'm so paganized. All right. So the Arabs on a roll. And of course, School of Alexandria. Who came around 332 A.D.? Not part of church history. We didn't have time to develop him. Alexander the Great. And in Egypt, you have the School of Alexandria, which was largely the center for Western learning. That's done with. They burned down the library in Alexandria. Do you think we had a lot of papyrus, a lot of New Testament fragments floating around there? You can bet you we did. Gone. History was burnt to pieces. A few decades later, you have the Synod of Whitby aligns itself, the English Church aligns itself with Rome for the next 900 years. So you got 641, Arabs conquering the Persians, Alexandria is destroyed. Go right above that, 641, Islam has wiped out largely Christians in Egypt, North Africa. Founded in 610, 632, blown through the Middle East, 640, done with Egypt and North Africa. Tell me they are not renegades, right? 641, same thing, conquer the Persians. While that's going on, the English Church aligns itself with Rome pretty much for the next 900 years. So you have the Middle East and you have the West, mainly Europe, the British neck of the woods. 672, the Venerable Bede. Who is he? The English monk and historian is born. What did he do? He introduced, that's actually dates. Yeah, he introduced the dates. I don't know what fates mean. He introduces the dates before the birth of Christ, BC. That was BD who did that. Remember BD. BC, BD, BD, BC. Before Christ. Now, what does AD mean? The year of our Lord. Año Dios, right? The year of our Lord. Between 675 and 753, very important fella, you have John of Damascus, the theologian. He opposes iconoclasm. Iconoclasm destroying religious objects, which is interesting. Boniface, between 675 and 754, becomes missionary to Germany. Very interesting. And of course, think about this fella and the Protestant Reformation, right? And right before that was launched, you have Martin Luther. So historically, just think of Boniface up to Luther. A lot of stuff going on in Germany. Anglo-Saxons, the Anglo-Saxon would be earliest English, right? Translate and paraphrases portions of Scripture. Translating, paraphrasing, that doesn't mean they wrote the Living Bible. The Living Bible is absolutely the worst Bible you could ever read. Don't ever read it. Don't read the Living Bible. It's just paraphrases of Scripture. That's not correct. It has nothing to do with languages, and you would have some problems if you try to put together a sermon based on the Living Bible, so don't do it. But in any event, that's what they're doing. Between 680 682, the Western and the Eastern Church drift even further apart. All right? Now notice here, you got iconoclasm in place, destroying religious objects, and then we move a little further, we get to an empress by the name of Irene, from what country? The Empress Irene in France, right? She gets veneration of images back into place. And then you get other people against that, and just back and forth and back and forth. But in any event, what's happening in Jerusalem at this time? Between 688 and 691, just 80 years after Islam is born, boom, they build the Dome of the Rock on top of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And of course, none of you will ever be granted access into the Dome of the Rock. So they discriminate. They don't want to be discriminated against, the Muslims. They want access everywhere, and they can. What's interesting here about the liberal mindset, and even some of the secular Jews, not talking about the rabbinical type of Jew, right? Talking about the secular Jews. You look at just Israel alone, setting aside Arab, Palestinian zones, if you will. When you go to Israel, on your own, you shouldn't the first time, you look at a map and you're driving around and there's like green, yellow, and red. Green is a good area. Yellow is a little shaky. Red, like Hebron, don't go in there alone, because there's no IDF to protect you. Okay? So if you roll into Hebron, you got the Palestinians, running around just like IDF with guns. When you go into Bethlehem to visit the birth of Christ, it's heavily Palestinian. What did the Muslims do to the Christian community in Bethlehem? They're virtually gone. Bethlehem used to be, the vast majority was Christian. Why are we allowing them to do the same thing? What do you think would happen to a two-state solution in Israel?
Calvary Chapel, Hebron.
I'm sorry?
Didn't we meet them? Calvary Chapel, Hebron, the pastor and his wife.
I don't remember. I don't remember.
Okay.
Maybe.
Maybe that's Golan Heights something.
Maybe.
Okay.
It's a cattle shop there.
Yeah.
He got bombed like 6 times.
Bombed 6 times?
Yeah.
Wow. So, they really have made headways. And it's sad when you think about our history. Very, very sad. But it is what it is. By the year 700, again, like I mentioned earlier, Greek instead of Latin becomes the official language in the Eastern Roman Empire. Eastern Roman Empire. In 711, the Moors, you've heard of the Moors, right? M-O-O-Rs, Muslim Moors, invade Spain and Portugal, their first foothold in Europe. Their very first foothold in Europe is now Spain and Portugal. And nothing's changed. They still blow up trains in Spain. Boniface, the missionary to Germany, establishes the Benedictine monasticism in 716. In 720, again, Bede, right? Remember Bede? Translates the Gospel of John into English. So that's 720. You see this right here? 720. It's not until 1611 we arrive at the King James Version. Thou shalt not, ye shall, and so forth. In 725, we observe the first official acts of iconoclasm by Pope Leo III and Constantine V. Destroying religious objects again. Then things get really, really interesting. In 732, Charles Martel defeats the Muslims in France. Charles Martel, also Charles the Great, right? Remember, when you graduate with honors, is magna cum laude, right? Or the pistol, the revolver, whatever you want to call it, Magnum 44, the Great 44. Alexander the Great, Alexander Magnus. Aquinas' instructor, Albertus Magnus, Albert the Great. Charlemagne, Charles the Great. So, Charles Martel defeats the Muslims in France. People are picking up on this. They're going like, wow, look at this cat. He's handling it. We need his help to fight the Lombards. The Greeks and the Arabs come and help us, because he knew how to handle it. Now, interesting too about the Goths, the Visigoths, right? You got them in the west. You got the Ostrogoths in the east. As they became more civilized, so to speak, right? They were sort of mercenaries for a while. You could hire them as they became more civilized. But in time, part of Germany, or Germanica, started picking up on Roman ways of fighting and eventually became their own army and turned. Very, very interesting stuff. So whoever's your friend might not be your friend, in about 90 years or so. So for 100 years, remember 732 all the way up to about 830, Muslims can't go any further. 730. Now, there's no political correctness here. There's no rhyme or reason. It's just, you guys are coming in here to take over. You're going to cut off our heads. I don't think so. We're going to meet fire with fire, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. There you go. Let the punishment fit the crime, which is British common law that this country was founded upon. British common law, a fancy way to say, if you're ever on the radio, oh, you Christians, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Well, let me rephrase that. Do you know about British common law? No. What about it? And you're just like, well, let the punishment fit the crime. Would you agree with that? Let me think about that. It's the same thing. Same exact thing. Now, if someone's guilty of rape, that doesn't mean you raped them. That's not let the punishment fit the crime. That's not what that means. But you certainly don't give them counseling and throw them back to, society, and they live next to a kindergarten 2 blocks away. Probably not a good idea. That's being so open-minded, your brain's falling out, right? So, in 739, it's no wonder that Pope Gregory III asked for Martel's help against the Lombards, Greeks, and Arabs. Next, you got Pepin. Pepin, who's the son of Martel, right? He unites and rules the Franks, roughly about mid-7th century, 750 or so. In the same year, 300 Byzantine bishops endorses iconoclasm, destroying religious objects. And I mentioned this today. In the Roman Catholic Church, you will see statues and figures. It has shape. In the Orthodox Church, you have just flat paintings, big eyes, and those are not considered idols. Anything else is considered an idol. And no, we don't worship Mary. We don't worship Thomas. We just venerate the saints. And the interesting part for them is, once you cross over from this life to the afterlife, life is even more real than it is now. So therefore, they are among us. To be alive in Christ post the physical death of this body is to be more alive than ever before. So when we invite the saints at worship, they are there with us. Not in an omnipresence type of sense, if you will, but they are more alive and we are with them because it's the church of the Lord, if you will. Once you understand the Orthodox way of viewing the afterlife and how it's all involved, it becomes interesting, to say the least. All right, so you got Charlemagne, the son of Pepin, France, expands his empire and forces Germany. Listen to this now. Now you got a little bit of force, quite a bit of force, some would say. Forces Germany, Italy, and the German Saxons to convert to Christianity. Now, I wouldn't blame him, because it's better if they become Christians than waiting for the new version of the Moors to arise and convert them to Islam. And had Germany become Islamic, I tell you one thing, there would be no Mercedes, there would be no Beamers. I just tell you that right now. I read an article years ago in Time magazine, and it was a lengthy article. I forgot what the heading was, but there was one sentence that stuck out to me. They were talking about the West, about us, in Europe, just how paganized we are. We're pagan religion, we're infidels, anything non-Islamic is should just die by the sword of Allah. Because Allah, the planet belongs to Allah, so when I conquer it for Allah, right? And it had a phrase in there where this Arab was interviewed, and he says, yeah, the slums of the West. And I read that. Yeah, we are the slums of the West. And I was just thinking, industrialism. I was thinking capitalism. I was thinking social fairness, human rights. I was thinking about productivity. Just that sentence, slums of the West, They want our money, right? They just, we get the oil, they get the money. And then they don't build their own limousines. They don't build their own airplanes. They can't build their own weapons without getting help from other countries like Russia. Show me one thing that they built. Yet they want them. They want the air condition, right? They want the modern showers that the slums of the West produce to them. See, we want the luxury, right? And then what we will do is we will blame it on the Jews and Americans that all this financial aid that I get to build another palace, right? We're going to keep that money and the oil money, and we're going to tell the poor out there that don't know 2 + 2 is 4. I'm going to tell them that we are broke and starved, and it's the problem of the West, the Jews and America. Hate them. Hate them. They're doing that on purpose. Interesting. And then, of course, one of those guys is interviewed, and we are the slums of the West. They want to take what we give them. Limos with TVs, radio, satellite. There wouldn't be no Al Jazeera TV if it wasn't for the West. I'm sorry to say that. And I know I'm going hard at this, but that's to put it into perspective. All right? So he expands, from Pepin here, expands his empire, forces Germany, Italy, and the German Saxons to convert to Christianity. That would be ancient German, just like Anglo-Saxon would be ancient English. In 771, Pepin becomes the king of France. Now here, 780, I mentioned Irene to you. Emperor Irene becomes the virtual. Now, that's a real good word because she's going to have to handle her son a bit later. So she becomes the virtual leader of the Byzantine Empire. Remember, we talked about Byzantium. We talked about the Western text, Byzantine text, Alexandrian text when it comes to Scripture. So this would be sort of the new Byzantium, because this is not the Byzantium you think of, in the early part of the church, if you will. But she's now the virtual leader of the Byzantine Empire and restores now image veneration, or icons. Yet in 794, the French king, Charlemagne, condemns image veneration at the Synod of at Frankfurt, or of Frankfurt. 3 years later, 797, Empress Irene, again of the Byzantine Empire, overthrows her son Constantine VI. She blinds him, assumes sole power, and reportedly wishes to marry Charlemagne. A lot of twisted stuff going on. in that part of the world. All right, look, from this moment up to the Protestant Reformation and shortly thereafter, you will have to log on to YouTube to get them. All right, those lectures are in the making. It's past 8 o'clock. I'm going to move into 2 different topics, still part of church history. So I'll leave this up in case you wanted to take notes. I want to talk to you about the reliability of the New Testament briefly. Not for you that have taken apologetics courses and systematic theology, and you should have had some of this, really, really down. It's more for the popular viewers that are not here. If you're writing this down, I don't have this on PowerPoint. When you are looking at the earliest copy and the time span between the original writing and copy of a New Testament fragment, the dates between those two are imperative. So write down Plato, write down Aristotle, write down Caesar, Herodotus, write down Aristophanes, and you can write down Tacitus. You've heard of Tacitus, I hope. So we got Plato, Aristotle, we got Caesar. Fourth, we got Herodotus, which is Herodotus, and then you have Aristophanes, Phanes, Aristophanes. You have Tacitus, Tacitus. All right. Plato, you're roughly around 427 to 347 BC. All right? You're going to look at his writings in comparison to the New Testament, how many copies we have and when they date and what the time span is between his day of living and the earliest copy that we have. Very interesting stuff. Aristotle, 384 up to about 322. Now, who lived during the time of Aristotle here? Alexander the Great. Did you know he was taught by Aristotle? So much for Manichaean ethics. Caesar, you got 100 through up to 44 AD. So 100 BC to 44 AD. Remember, there's no year 0. There's 1 BC and there's 1 AD. There is no year 0. 0 is not what? It's not even a number, is it? The number 0, no. Okay, and then you have Aristophanes, again, 450 BC to 385 BC.
Herodotus.
Huh?
Herodotus.
Oh, Herodotus, 480 BC to 425. Herodotus, not Herodotus. Herodotus. And Aristophanes is next, 450, 385 BC. And then Tacitus, who wrote a lot about early Christians, or quite a bit, we should say, right around 100 AD. All right. Having said this now, we can get into other sources. Maybe we'll mention some of them, like Sophocles. If you're writing fast, Sophocles is 496 to 406 BC. Sophocles, Sophocles. All right. Plato. The time span between the original writing and the copy is 1,200 years. Just write down, do a chart, somewhere like this. You got the names here, time span, number of copies, and accuracy. All right? So we have the name, earliest copy dating to when? Which is 900 AD. So if Plato lived in 427 BC, and we have the earliest copy in 900 AD,
And they quote that without
you got 1,200 years. You go to UCLA or USC, we're going to read Plato today. How do you know? It would be like saying the Apostle Paul lived in the 1st century. Thomas Aquinas in the 12th century finds a copy in the 12th century and attributes that to Paul. Same thing. 1,200 years is the time span between the original writing of Plato in the 4th century BC and the earliest copy, 900 AD. Do you understand? that the distance between the two, the shorter it is, right, the better it is. If we discovered the book of Genesis in the year 3022 A.D., you would go, Moses who? Genesis what? Because it would be 5,000 something years between Moses living and 3,000, right? Are you with me? So, how many copies do we have of Plato? 7. Accuracy? Unknown. Because all we got is 7. And there's 1,200 years in between them. What about Aristotle? 1,400 years time span. He lived 384, right? So you got 3rd century BC up to 322 BC. Earliest copy, 1100 AD. 1100 AD. That's some 100 years before Thomas Aquinas. University of Paris is rolling. You got all sorts of stuff. Islam has already been around for 600 years. We find the earliest copy of Aristotle, 1100 AD. How many copies? 49. 49 copies now. Accuracy? Unknown. Because the year span between Aristotle living and the earliest copy is 1,400 years. Why am I saying this? Because we're going to get the New Testament and see how this squares. All right, Caesar. Earliest copy, 900 AD. 9th century. That's where we're at right now, roughly, in church history, right? Empress Irene is horsing around, Charlemagne, Franks are going off, and Visigoths have had their party, still going at it, and during that era, oh, look what we found. Here we got a copy of Caesar. 900 AD. 1,000-year difference. How many copies? 10. So you got 7?
49.
49. And you got 10. How many of Herodotus? 8. Year span? Difference? 1,300 years. 1,300 years. Therefore, accuracy is unknown. Aristophanes. Earliest copy? 900 AD. 900 AD, 1,200 years is the time span. 10 copies of Aristophanes. And then you have Tacitus, 1100 AD, same thing. 20 copies, 1,000-year difference. Now, let's be fair, all right? I read Plato, I read Aristotle from what has been attributed to them. I read Tacitus, I will quote Tacitus, you know, because some scholars will say, well, most likely he said so, and if he says something about Christianity, I'm gonna read what he has to say. You know, same thing goes for whom? Who else would we cite amongst the poets or the historians? Josephus would be a Jewish historian. Homer Iliad would be another, right? You have Pliny the Younger, right? That would be another. Pliny, P-L-I-N-Y, Pliny the Younger. And so forth. Now, there are more authors, but for now, if you add these up, you have a total of 104 copies, right? 2 more authorities, if you want them. Sophocles, S-O-P-H, O-C-L-E-S, 496-406 B.C., 1,400-year lifespan, because the earliest copy was found in 1000 A.D., but we have 193 of these. 193 of these. Accuracy, still unknown. And then you have, of course, Homer Iliad. Homer, the second best attested document of ancient history. 643 copies. 643 copies. What's the earliest copy? 400 BC. 400 BC. If he lived in the 9th century, 900 BC, you got a year span of about 500 years. That's still tremendous. That would be like, you know, Muhammad saying, look, the Jews have corrupted the Old Testament, the Christians have corrupted the New Testament, and here I am with the Quran in the 6th century. It's just, 100 years after the first copy found of Homer, right? And here we are. I said 400 BC, I should say. What's that?
You meant he was in 90 BC? That's where he lived?
900 BC, and then you got 400 BC, earliest copy. 400 BC, time span 500 years, 643 copies, and as far as comparison, you got 95%. That's if my dates are correct. All right, now let me share something here. I hope that's correct. You got me worried now. Now listen, have you heard of Colin Hamer? Colin Hamer? Let me tell you what he says about the book of Acts alone. The book of Acts. You can't write all this down. According to Roman historian Colin Hammer, the book of Acts was written between AD 60 and 62. That would be just some 30 years after the ascension of Christ. Are you with me? All right. So he makes the following observations. Very interesting about the book of Acts, which is early church history. The fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD is not mentioned. It's not mentioned in the book of Acts. Therefore, probably was written before the fall of Jerusalem. Right? The Jewish war in AD 66 is not mentioned either. Now, some would say, well, it happened after the event. Wasn't Luke inspired by the Holy Spirit to write down these things as they happen, and therefore didn't mention it? The late date setters, or the early date setters for the book of Revelation, would say the same thing. And the late date setters, if you go with 96 AD of the book of Revelation, 96 AD, you could say, why didn't John mention the destruction of Jerusalem? Obviously, it was written before, you would think. But then again, he was supposed to write down these things by the Lord, right? Blessed are you who read this book, the strangest book of them all. Blessed are you who read this specific book. You're still going to be blessed, but this one has something special because it deals with the second coming. Why didn't John write down that, by the way, Jerusalem burned down, some 30 years ago, blah, 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 because he would have been disobedient to Christ, who says, write down these things accordingly. Okay? So the Jewish war, AD 66, is not mentioned either. The Neronian persecution, Nero, in the late 60s is not mentioned either. James's execution by the Sanhedrin in 63 AD is also missing, which is also verified by Josephus in the Antiquity of the Jews, the Jewish historian. The prominence of the Sadducees' authority in Acts, remember, the Sadducees are sort of the high rollers of that date, not the Pharisees, the Sadducees, in Acts. And that reflects what he calls a pre-70s date, before the collapse of their political cooperation with Rome. Therefore, he dates it early. Acts records a more sympathetic view of the Pharisees than what we see in Luke, and does not fit the uprising Pharisaic revival leading up to the Council of Jamnia in 70 AD, after a time of which a new phase of conflict began with Christianity, or within Christianity, or at Christianity. The book of Acts states that Peter and John were alive at the time of the writing, so they haven't died yet. They died in Rome. Acts record an early culture of a Julio-Claudian era. We talked about Claudius earlier. Areas of controversy described by Luke presume the temple was still standing. Now, Adolf Harnack contended that Paul's prophecy in Acts 20, verse 25, may have been contradicted by later events. If so, Acts must have appeared before those events. That's the good news. Christian terminology, point 11 here, used in Acts reflects an earlier period. In other words, it calls ha kurios versus ha Christos. Okay, kurios is Lord. Kurios. And Christos would be the Christ, right? So ha kurios was used earlier than ha Christos, Christ, the Lord, the Christ. What's that?
Was it for da or ha?
Ha is O. But the main focus here is kurios versus Christos. When you say ha, it's just an O with a breathing mark above it.
Oh.
If you take in any Greek at all, you look in that Greek, if you see an O, it typically means the. If you put a little breathing mark above it, a C, it becomes ha. If you put a breathing mark this way, it's a silent. It just means like Omicron. So that would be ha, kurios. It's all. Think of it like a harsh C. Harsh, ha. But when Jesus, remember Thomas in the upper room. What does he say? The Lord of mine and the God of mine. There it is. Hakurios. Hakurios mu, the Lord of mine. Kai, K-I-A, Kappa, Alpha, and Yoda. Yoda is the little I. Looks like that. Don't think it's Star Wars. Hakurios mu means the Lord of mine. as Christ appears? Kai. Kai theos mu. Hakurios mu kai ha theos mu. Theos, God. Theos, or circle with a dash through it. That's theta, right? Epsilon, omicron, short s. Looks like this. Which is a sigma. And if a sigma or an s is used in the middle of the word, it would be written like this, like a straight line and then up. There's two s's in Greek. So, hakurios mu kai theos mu, if you write that down straight out, translate it. It's not my Lord and my God. No, it's the Lord of mine and the God of mine. Something you can use against the cultists. Because a Jewish little homeboy is not going to say that if he's been raised up in Old Testament Judaism. Like, my God! Now, what does Jehovah's Witness say? They attribute that he was cursing. It's like, my God, is you, Lord? Man, good to see you. No, a Jewish boy would not use the Lord's name in vain, and certainly, number two, would not call another Jewish man like Jesus God if he didn't believe it. Now, how did he appear in the upper room? You've been to the upper room, but it's not the real upper room. It's way, way, way below us. But we're up here with Islamic paintings and windows and Crusader arches and everything else. But anyway, it's way down there. Having said that, how did Jesus get into the room? If it was a physical resurrection and the door was locked and he just appeared, how did he get in there? If you believe not in a spiritual resurrection, because we believe it was the same body that physically rose from the dead. Right? He ate a piece of broiled fish at the Sea of Galilee, right? Thomas felt his sides, right? And I won't believe, Thomas a doubter, and would throw him under the bus too often. I would have been a doubter too. What happened? I spent 3 years with this Lord. And he did some extraordinary things, and look, where is he? He's in the tomb, he's dead. I would have been a doubter too. How are you, sir? Good to see you. So, having said that, good afternoon. It was a good morning when we got her. I'm just joking. Glad you're here. So, having said that, how did he get in there?
Different dimensions.
Okay, we're going to get into that. All right.
We don't know.
He's lying.
No one knows.
He wasn't his divine.
So he just got rid of his carcass and went through the wall and somehow got reunited with his flesh on the other side? How did he get in? These are good things to think about, right?
So I can question.
I think he picked the lock. He could have. That's a possibility. Go.
When he was at the cross,
Yes.
they brought him down. Yeah. But in the spirit, he did go to the Hades. But his spirit went to the Hades, or he went with his whole body to the Hades. And then the body put him on the tomb. You know,
The physical body's in the tomb.
yeah, no. But
John 2:19, by the way, is one of those. It's a three-pronged argument that you can pull out against Jehovah's Witnesses. John 2:19. What does Jesus say? Destroy, listen to this, this is good. This is one of those A, B's, and C's, right? Destroy this body, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Think about destroy this. The word this in hermeneutics, right? And it goes together. Destroy this body, and in 3 days I will raise it up. This body over here. So now he's crucified, he's stabbed, he's buried in the personal tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, right? They wrap him up in linen, throw him in the tomb, and he's there for 3 days. His physical carcass, right? Jehovah's Witnesses believe in annihilationism, right? There's no life after death except for the 177,000, which was filled by Jehovah's Witnesses a long time ago. Why even sign up for them? Those seats are probably taken already, you know. But in any event, so Christ is now on the other side of death. Now think about the verse there. I will raise that body in the tomb from the dead. That proves, number one, that he's got more powers than the average Jewish boy. I'm going to raise not somebody else from the dead. I'm going to raise myself from the dead. So that means he's conscious in the afterlife, saying, I'm going to raise that same carcass from the dead and be united with it in a resurrected state. Number two, annihilationism is false because he's alive after death, spiritually. Right? And it would, number 3, prove that he's God in that sense. Because not only am I going to die, I'm going to raise myself from the dead. That takes divine powers. So there, annihilationism, right? John 2:19, all in one verse. He's raising himself from the dead, shows that he was conscious, so hence there is life after death. He raised himself from the dead, therefore he's God. A lot of stuff in that verse. How did we get on that topic? All right. Oh, Jesus picked it up in the upper room, right? All right, so Acts states that Peter and John was alive. Acts records an early culture of the Julio-Claudian era. Presume the temple was still standing. In Christian terminology used in Acts, there we are, ha kurios mu, ka theos mu, kurios, Lord, versus ha Christos, used a little later. The confident and bold tone. There's a bold tone, very interesting. Remember, to the most excellent Theophilus, right? I'm going to tell you these things as they accurately happen. Luke was a historian of the day, a doctor of the day, traveling companion with Paul, so he saw quite a bit. He has a confident and bold tone that seems unlikely had it been written during Nero's persecution and the Jewish war with Rome in the late 60s. Now, if Acts was written in 62 or before, and the Gospel of Luke was written before Acts, say 60 AD, then it must be that Luke was written less than 30 years after the death of Christ. Amen? Little better than 1,200 years, right? Austrian scholar Jakob Kramer has called Luke one of the greatest historians of his time, lending credence to Luke's authorship in addition to early dating. Furthermore, concerning the date of 1 Corinthians, it is generally a consensus among scholars, including liberal theologians, to date it somewhere around 55 or 56 AD, less than 25 years after the crucifixion. These books not only claim to be written by Paul, 1 Corinthians, Gary Habermas, he teaches at Liberty. You know what he does? He looks at the liberal theologians, the liberal scholars, Habermas does, and says, what books of the New Testament do they believe Paul wrote, for example? Okay, unanimously, across the board, most go with 1 Corinthians 15. Why is that important? Because, later on, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all these miracles, resurrection talk, that was later, as a Christian invention, if you will. Now, Paul's horsing around, 5th, 55, 56 AD, penning down his first letter to Corinth, right? Why is that important? In 1 Corinthians 15, you can establish the gospel. What does it say? He's setting straight the pagan way of thinking in the new Corinthian Christian mindset, surrounded by, whorehouses and brothels and everything else, and it's just a party town, and these guys are getting saved. You got booze coming from by the shiploads. It's a seaport, and these Christians are getting saved, but it's a rough bunch. Sort of like the Christian biker gang, They're all going to AA and NA. It's just, I'm kidding. Not all of them, but a lot of them do, right? But they're rough, and they might, slip this bomb there and that bomb there. You're just going, wait a second, aren't you, and it's just, well, I'm rough, but they love Jesus. It's a trip. It's a trip. And I know a lot of them. Yes. Oh, you're just fixing your hair? I wish I could do the same thing. I am. I'm cutting mine tomorrow. I was going to cut it tonight. It's too long for you, I know. Like I said, it's a waste of time to have hair. Really, I'm going to go to the hairdresser. He needs a haircut. Yeah. All right. So, in any event, he says here, in 1 Corinthians 15, remember Paul has been called a hymn quoter, right? Or a creed dropper. He drops creeds, He says something very important in 1 Corinthians 15, which predates Luke, which predates Acts, because Acts is a sequel to Luke. What does it say? That which I received, I also pass on to you. I know this is exciting stuff, but keep it down in the back. I'm just joking. So he says, that which I received, you got to put a circle there and go, what did Paul receive? That I also pass on to you of utmost importance. Now, if you were writing that in the paper and on your computer, you hit tab and do 3 bullets. It says, that, Christ, what? Died and rose again, right? On the third day. That Christ, third day lingo, rose from the dead. That's something that Paul received way over here and is now sharing with the Corinthians. You know, in the Kidron Valley, there's a tombstone that has an inscription on it that dates, I think it's Luke 4, that dates to the 1st century, that tombstone. It's not Absalom's tomb, because that is not Absalom's tomb, by the way. It's not. But that's not where Luke 4 is inscribed. Anyway, my head's spinning. This is good stuff. Read 1 Corinthians 15. That which I received also passed on to you. If the liberal scholar goes and says, look, that is definitely Pauline, they'd have to say, you know what? He was just suffering from epilepsy or something, being knocked down on the horse on his way to Damascus. And that's what they say. He probably had an epileptic seizure and fell off the horse. And that's how he became saved, you know, at Cornelius' house in Damascus, in Syria. Interesting. So if you go with their dates that they accept, see what I'm doing here? And you attribute that, you can, I mean, as far as it being authentic, you can argue gospel truths. There's the third day lingo and resurrection talk, etc. All right, let's see here. Moving on real quick. I'm just going to end on this point. The year span of only 100 years of the New Testament documents, if we had even a year span of 500 years, say like Homer, between the original writing and the earliest dating copy, the fact remains. We have 5,686 copies. I think that number went up 2 years ago by a few. What was it now?
I think it's 5,700.
It's a little more than that, I think. Yeah. Used to be 5,500, but right here, when I wrote this, we're at 5,686. We're getting closer to higher numbers. And copies, they are 95.5% accurate. 95.5% accurate. All right. And then you also have 19,000 copies in Syriac, Latin, and Coptic. So add those together. I mean, we're blowing Homer away with this 643 and Plato's little 7, right? If you think of it. Now, if you recall, I mentioned that if you could, based on the church fathers alone, remember the early church fathers, the way they cited the Bible, Tertullian, these heavies, they quoted scriptures so often that we could, if we just cut out say we didn't have these 5,686 fragments or New Testament books. Think of 6,000. We don't have the 19,000, right, of Syriac, Latin, Coptic. Add those together, you're at 26,000 versus 749, 10, or 643, right? If we didn't have those at all, and went through the church fathers alone and cut out every single Bible verse that they quoted, we could reconstruct the entirety of the New Testament short of what? 11 verses in 3 John. Like I said before, straight from Geisler, when's the last time you read 3 John? Right? Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. What's 3 John all about? What is, Krista, 3 John, because you weren't here last time. What's it talk about? See, that's why the church fathers didn't quote on it. It wasn't of any huge doctrinal importance, right? So, I told you I tricked Geisler, right? I walked up to him, I go, come on, 3 John inspired by the Lord? Come on, man. It's about hospitality. What's that have to do with, Christology? It's careful, Nick, careful, Nick. I go, I'm just kidding. Actually, my pockets of deep agnosticism was, I got to hear his answer here. He's like, shh, reject it. No, I'm just kidding. That's not very funny. All right, well, boy, we're behind time. I'm going to upload some stuff on William Tyndale and also on Origen. I mentioned that I wanted to mention a few figures, and I'm not going to be able to mention them all given the short module. So we're not going to get into Origen and William Tyndale right now. Sorry, papers I wrote a long time ago based on those fellas. Pay attention and read. Get the lectures that are going to be uploaded before next week. And for the viewers, We got one more week here, so between now and Sunday, there'll be more lectures uploaded. All right, shalom.